Welcome to the Inspirational Living podcast, brought to you in part by Book of Zen, makers of wearable inspiration for a better world. Today's podcast has been edited and adapted from the book entitled The Conquest of Fear by Basil King, published in 1921. Fear of death is greatly diminished by recognizing the truth of everlasting growth. This truth is reflected in everything we know of life. Our observation of life is of course limited to this planet, but as far as it goes, it shows us a persistent and perpetual system of development. We have only to let our imaginations go back to the first stirrings of life in Earth's primeval seas, and contrast that with what it became in Plato, Sophocles, Raphael, Shakespeare, and Einstein, to see how high the climb upward has been. Every individual is a growing entity. Each year, each day, expands you a little further, with increased fullness of character. At 30, you are more than you were at 20. At 50, more than you were at 30. At 80, more than you were at 50. Nothing but our distorted view of mortality stands in the way of further expansion still. Our fear of death is one of the impulses we have to struggle with. The mortal tendency, which means the deadly tendency, always seeks to kill whatever has the principle of life. This tendency is in every one of us, but in some of us more than in others. You can see it at work in the morbid mind, in the mind that is easily depressed, and in the mind that easily closes. Perhaps it is in this last example that it becomes our most pernicious enemy. The closing mind is found in all our ranks. The closed mind is the deadwood of all our professions. It is not only the deadwood, it is death in life, the foe of the developing life principle, the enemy of the divine. That the dead mind should be often found among people who have had few intellectual advantages is not surprising. On them it is forced from without by sheer pressure of circumstance. Where it is most painful to see is among college graduates and professionals. Yet here too it seems common. Lawyers, doctors, clergymen, teachers, writers, politicians, and business people with dead minds choke all the highways of life. To the extent that they have influence, they are obstacles to progress. But sooner or later the time comes when they no longer have influence. Life shelves them on the plea that they are old, but that is not the real reason. They are shelved because they have killed their minds, becoming the living dead. One of the most valuable of our social and national assets is the old person who has kept their mind open. Found all too rarely, they are never shelved, for the reason that life cannot do without them. Having the habit of expansion, they continue to expand, keeping abreast of youth and even a little in advance of it. Although this person is today the exception rather than the rule, there is no reason why they should not be the common type. The reason they are such a rarity is that so many of us begin to die almost as soon as we have begun to live. Our very fear of the death principle admits it into our consciousness. Admitted into our consciousness, it starts its work of killing us. It wrinkles the face, it turns the hair gray, it enfeebles the limbs, it stupefies the brain. One of its most deadly weapons is fatigue, or the simulation of fatigue. The tired business person who rules American life is more often than not a dead business person, who, in addition to dying themselves, infuses death into the customs, literature, economics, and art of our age, since they so largely set the standard which becomes the rule. War on the death principle, not terrorism, should be, it seems to me, one of the aims to which we commit our strength as a nation and as individuals, for it is a battle that we can wage on our own account, by ourselves. To begin with, we can watch ourselves so that we do not mentally begin to grow old, because to begin mentally to grow old is to begin mentally to die. We must think of ourselves as expanding beings, not as contracting ones. We must keep in sympathetic touch with the new and innovative, damning the know-it-all frame of mind. We must also keep in sympathetic touch with youth, knowing that youth is the next generation in advance. The secrets of one generation are not those of another. But if we who possess the earlier wisdom also possess the later, we are that much the richer and wiser. The gulf which separates parents and children is one which the parents must cross. We can work onward, but our children cannot work backward. Up to a certain point, the older teach the younger. Beyond a certain point, the younger teach the older. We who would go on living and not begin to die must be willing to be taught, reaping the harvest of both youth and age. In the second place, we who would live must not kill anyone else. The deadly tendency in ourselves is forever at work on those about us, chiefly on those we love. We watch, tabulate, and recount their symptoms of decay. Making notes of them for ourselves, we talk of them to others. "They are beginning to look old," is a common expression. The response we get in return will probably emphasize the fact. By response to response, we spin round a friend the age web which lengthens into the death web. It is true that in some ways we can wish conditions on others, and we often do it in an unconscious, sinister way rather than by helpfulness. We wish by thinking, by talking, by creating an atmosphere, by forcing things into the general consciousness. Old age and decay, bad enough in themselves, we intensify by our habits of mind. Death, which in any case awaits our friends, we woo to them by anticipations of demise. It is not so much ill-intentioned, but rather it comes out of a subconscious where death, and not life, is the baseline instinct. For most of us, the fear of death is a subconscious fear rather than an active one. It usually only becomes active for those who through illness or in some other way see a sentence of death hanging over them. But during the greater part of our lifespan, we usually are able to beat it away. Humanity is rebellious by nature. Something to strive for we demand, even at the risk of bereavement. When great sorrows come, it is because either we ourselves have failed, or the failure of others affects us indirectly. Nevertheless, we would not have it otherwise. In our more thoughtless or more agonizing minutes, we are likely to cry out for a life in which the conditions ensuring our happiness could not so easily miscarry. But that would mean a static life, and a static life above all things we will not endure. On the contrary, we ask for difficulties to conquer, successes to achieve. To contend is our instinct, not to be passive and enjoy. Difficulties to conquer can only exist side by side with the possibility of not conquering them. The victory which is merely a walk in the park is scarcely a victory. Achievement counts only when something has been overcome. And even then, the overcoming of one thing merely spurs us on to overcome another. To rest on our laurels is doom. For we who have the infinite as our goal, the words must be on and on. Changing our static conception of life to that of a dynamic will to unfold, we see the climax we commonly call death as only a new step in unfoldment. Whatever I have been, the next step must be one that advances. It would not be in accord with creative energy that I should go backward. The advance may entail suffering, since it is probable that it will give me a heightened perceptions of the wrong in my methods. But there are conditions in which suffering signifies advance. If I am to suffer, it can only be with what I may call a curative suffering. It will be suffering that comes from the recognition of mistakes, not the hopeless anguish of the damned. Having learned how not to do it, I perceive how to do it, and go on. I venture to think that few of us will come face to face with death without being more or less prepared for it. Facing death without fear. All the joy of life seems to me to hang on that little phrase. After all, the conquest of fear is largely a question of vitality. Those who have the most life are the most fearless. An abundant life must be healthy, active, and radiant. It should show the life principle no longer battling with a million foes, but vigorous and triumphant. This vigor and triumph we ought to work into our point of view so as to knead it into our subconsciousness. Strong in proportion as our subconsciousness is strong. Fearless in proportion as our subconsciousness is fearless. The going from strength to strength becomes then a matter of course to us. Urging us on in sheer joy of power, abundance of life becomes still more abundant through the indwelling of the life principle. The mystic, resistless force which has fashioned already so many forms is forever at work fashioning a higher type of individual. Each one of us is that higher type of person potentially. Though we can forge but a little ahead of our time and generation, it is much to know that the spirit of life is our animating breath, pushing us on to the overcoming of all obstacles. For me as an individual, it is a support to feel that the principle which has never yet been defeated is my principle, and that whatever the task of today or tomorrow, I have the ability to perform it well. The hesitation that may seize me, or the questioning which for an instant may shake my faith, is but a reminder that the life principle is not only with me, but more abundantly with me in proportion to my need. My need is its call. The spasm of fear which crosses my heart summons it to my aid. It not only never deserts me, but it never delays, and is never at a loss for some new ingenuity to meet my new requirements. As I get up each morning, it is there. As I plan my day while I dress myself, it is there. As I think with misgivings of some email that I tremble about receiving, or with distaste at some job I must tackle before night, it is there. It is there not only with its help, but with its absolute knowledge of the right way for me to act. The care that worries me may be great or it may be small, but the right way of fulfilling either task is pleading to be allowed to enter my intelligence. My task is its task. My success will be its success. My failure will react on it, since failure sets us back by that degree the whole procession of the ages. Whether I am painting a great masterpiece, writing new computer code, or sewing on a button, my success is essential to the advancing Holy Spirit of life. So I, the individual, try to confront each day with the knowledge that I am infused with a guiding, animating principle which will not let me drop behind or lose my modest reward, so long as I trust the force which carries me along. My small experience in the conquest of fear can be condensed into these 4 words: calmly resting, quiet trust. That amid the turmoil of our time and the feverishness of our days it is always easy, I do not pretend. Still less do I pretend that I can always accomplish it. All I can say is that I have tried. Trying is as far as I have gone, but even trying can produce wonderful results. Into a brighter future, humanity advances slowly, unwillingly, driven by our pain. But we do advance. The further we advance, the more we perceive our spiritual power. The more we perceive of that power, the more we are freed from fear. The more we are freed from fear, the more joyously we feel our abundance of life. The more joyously we feel our abundance of life, the more we reject death in any of its forms. And the more we reject death in any of its forms, the more we feel that spirit of life urging us on from conquest to conquest, from strength to strength, to the fulfilling of our true selves. The Inspirational Living podcast is a production of The Living Hour. For free transcripts of our podcasts, visit us online at livinghour.org. Today's podcast was sponsored in part by autosuggestion.io. Transform your life in 30 days. Discover the autosuggestion sound method at autosuggestion.io. And by Book of Zen, makers of wearable inspiration and motivational gifts. Visit them online at bookofzen.com. Subscribe to the Inspirational Living podcast by looking us up in the iTunes Store. If you're using an Android phone, download the Stitcher app and you'll find us on there. We deliver new podcasts twice a week, every Tuesday and Thursday. Thanks for joining us. I look forward to talking to you next time.